Dr. Christine Cserti-Gazdewich, who's a transfusion medicine specialist and consultant hematologist, originally trained in internal medicine and clinical hematology in Toronto, and transfusion medicine at Harvard. She's based at the University Health Network since 2006, co-directs the blood transfusion service, and also has responsibilities extending out to many other sites, and serves as also as a clinical and consultant hematologist at UHN. Her areas of professional focus are immunohematology and hemovigilance, and we're very pleased to have her speak on TACO and also have her involved in the TTISS program in general.
All right, thank you so much, everyone, for this opportunity to be with you again at the podium this year. I had a lot of comments to the amazing session delivered by Raza and the discussion. So hopefully some of the comments that I meant to say will be coming shortly, but I'm going to be talking from a hospital perspective of using the alliteration of the T's here on TACO. So without further ado, I'm going to see if my slides advance. Yes. Okay. So in terms of conflicts, I would say that I've got a bit of a mixed profile: clinical, laboratory, urban, as well as rural, academic, non-academic. So we're sort of seeing it all, and it's taught us a lot in our non-artificial intelligence. The other disclosures relate to the research interest, and hopefully the tadpole study might be another learning source, because it's a very rich data set where we kind of went beyond the norm for filling in the gaps that would naturally be confronted in chart review. So machine learning is one of the goals in this project too, one of the tertiary goals. But first, we just want to see if more information helps us classify better, because we're just bedraggled by so much uncertainty. So there's a lot of possible and probable this and that instead of definite. And so we're wondering if tightening up an information availability standard changes how we view or reclassify a reaction and improves its own confidence. So I'm indebted to this incredible group called Quest, and you could see some asterisks here for some of the speakers who are going to be coming up or who've already spoken so far. And so it's a huge honor to be here in the McMaster space, bringing Toronto to you and the TACO obsession that some of us have. So this session is going to be in 3 phases: tribulations, tidings, and tidyings. And so the tribulations are going to be about the collective trauma of TACO and the challenges, what remains unknown about this entity. We think we know everything about it, but I'll tell you we don't. The tidings are glad and sad. So there are some good news based on certain secular trends, but also, as was mentioned at the very beginning of the day, something that's been very upsetting to all of us to hear on August 28th. And then tidings are going to be speaking to pre-printed orders, leveraging hospital EMRs for clinician decision support as active prevention from a single center experience, and then some visions on future state. So for tribulations, I'm going to start with an acknowledgement. This is sort of like a land acknowledgement, and it's to really more intensely, rather than to less intensely, re-prosecute myself or ourselves. This was written by a patient when he was 60 with MDS, had 3 bone marrow transplants from his sister. And it was about when the Voyager probe was asked to turn back to look at the Earth 6 billion kilometers away. It happened on Valentine's Day, 1990. The Voyager probes were otherwise just looking outwards. And so this was one opportunity before the Earth was going to disappear to just look at this little blue speck. And so he said, look again at that dot, that's here, that's home, that's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you've ever heard of, every human being who ever was lived out their lives, the aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, corrupt politician, superstar, supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There's perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish. So these were the words of Carl Sagan. And yeah, the world is a ball of confusion. And so, I bring this up because I think everyone's kind of suffering in their own way. There's stuff happening south of the border, there's geopolitics, there's nostalgia, like what state is the world going to be in? There's big picture, there's tiny picture. How do we navigate this all? And how do we focus ourselves on what's important, what adds value? Why are we in this game? What do we care about? How are we making this better for patients like Carl Sagan, who died at the age of 62? So again, this is my view of the moat of dust. It's big and it's small at the same time. These are the footprints for our denominators of activity, which are the high volumes that lead to high risk in the world of transfusion medicine, known as a high volume, high risk activity. So we've passed the 100,000 components per year denominator with all of our sites put together, and there's more sites coming, but this was 2023 data. And we've been watching ourselves and how we report through the years, just to see, are we keeping in a healthy range reactions at 1 in every 100 to 1 in every 1,000 transfusion encounters. And so you can see how these numbers sort of add up. So we have reactions now with a very tightening confidence interval of 1 in every 175 components, no matter where you are. And so Andrew was showing what some of the rates look like during and after the pandemic. Depending on the hospital, we saw some of that as well. You can kind of see 2023 looks maybe a little beefier than 2021, but this is what it looks like at UHM specifically. So my home base, 322 reactions in 2023. So about one a day on average, but there are some days where we might have 3 or 4. We had 1 fatality due to hyperhemolysis among 4 cases. And the big thing here, our interest today is TACO, and that comprised 22 cases or 7% of this reaction load. Half of the TACO patients died, but non-attributably to the reaction. We had 6 anaphylaxis, 1 type 2 trolley, which will be presented this afternoon, as well as a TARDS. And in 2023, we had an 8% higher reaction reporting rate versus 2022. But that was scaled against a similar rise in the number of patients served. So, I think a lot of us are serving more people year by year, and we're feeling that in our workload. So the drill down of UHM's TACOs in 2023. So tribulation number 1, clearly it still exists and it still harms. So these were all non-outpatient or so-called more serious settings, 2 in the emerge, medical ward, surgical ward, ICU. 15 of the 22 had their products dominantly imputable, which means that the rest were maybe more due to foregoing volumes. We coined the term stocko, where someone is saline or crystalloid preempted, and then the beginning of a transfusion is sort of the straw that breaks the camel's back. 11 of those 22 were just single unit sittings, kind of small volume stimulus, and yet they had it. For the proportion that were serious versus minor, it was 50-50. So 7 were severe and 4 were life-threatening. So as I had alluded to, 45% had died, and the time to death was 2 to 60 days. Each and every one of these individuals was sick with a terminal illness per the certificate cause of death. They had a complete or partial recovery from the TACO at the time that they had died, but certainly didn't make their leaving of their lifetime any easier. So you get an illusion of a high case fatality rate. And I also don't want us to oversell the significance of TACO, but I don't want to undersell the corrupting that this is to an end-of-life experience. So I call this anti-palliative palliation, when we're transfusing someone and not bracing for this possibility. So, O TACO, how do we not love thee, but know thee? So let us count the ways. So here I'm going to dip a little bit into the archetype and timing and form, how we identify and confirm. So what are our basic algorithms in the definition? The frequencies, so what do we quote incidence-wise? And how does this represent all comers? And more importantly, how it represents top among the kills. So the proportions of deaths in different hemovigilance bases. I want to speak a little bit to the remaining unknowns as well as the preventability. So obviously this is in the acute realm, defined as occurring within 12 hours of the exposure, and informed between earth, wind, and fire, the febrile, allergic, or visceral cardiorespiratory events. Our experience is, and I'm sure everyone else sees this too, the majority of the reactions you get referred are febrile. Next in line, so in a 5 to 3 to 2 ratio would be your allergics. And though this is the quote unquote minority, so 20 to 25% of our reactions have a cardiorespiratory flavor to them. And yes, there's overlap. So this isn't showing what all of that is, but this paper here has some Venn diagrams illustrating just how intersectional some of our reactions are. The dominant cause of our cardiorespiratory disturbances are indeed cardiogenic. And so that's really the big distinguishing question. So probably the most distressing if we ask our patients, and it's surprising how little patient-reported outcomes or patient-reported opinions research there is on how much more distressing a respiratory reaction is relative to everything else. Because if we care about patient-based priorities, then that would guide us also to what's more important. The quality of life experience counts very much, in parallel with dying. So certainly these are care escalating, and we framed that in work at UHN and Sunnybrook. 20% of our TACO patients end up escalating into ICU, or at least getting some kind of ICU consultation. So there's a revised definition, and this is how we identify. So I won't go over the elements of the definition, but it requires data. And many times we don't have, we've got holes in our charts. And even though the definition doesn't describe, definite versus probable versus possible, we all know that in our TISS environment, we do code our reactions with softer probabilistic language if we're not certain. And so that's technically not part of the definition, but it gives wiggle room to the idea that, TACO may be happening more than the definition allows us to identify or confirm it. And so I very much heard this earlier, right? What is the purpose of identification? Is it utmost specificity so you can answer a research question and understand the biology of that archetype? Or is it to be as inclusive as possible? Should that definition, with all of its holes, give you the best indicator of quality of care? So we've meditated on this quite a lot, and in our published work, made the point of reporting both polarities. And it's also very interesting to see what's different than in cases that are called possible TACO versus definite. Do they have different mortality rates, for example? The answer to that, by the way, is yes. So in the paper, we're really kind of pushing this idea that TACO deserves a possible subcategory. We looked at about 1,800 reactions over 4 years, and obviously there's more diagnoses than there are people, because some patients have, as I mentioned, overlap states or multiple things happening at once, like a febrile cardiorespiratory event. So when we gated on the subset of those 2,400 for the more certain grade reactions, we had a more limited number. And so we were kind of playing with what these two pots were able to teach us. And, we wanted to formalize our rubric on how we called a definite versus a likely, probable, or possible TACO with examples, because, we have chart holes, as I've mentioned. These are realities, and if machine learning is going to be observing hospital charts, it also has to figure out what to do with the gaps. So maybe it imputes that this would have been a TACO if the BMP was such and such, but it wouldn't be if it wasn't. And maybe we can quote a binary, sort of like a dialectical bootstrapping situation. So there is an opportunity to be nuanced and to give a range rather than a dichotomous yes/no answer. So, acknowledging that we wanted to give space to the possibles as well as to the definites, we, did a rank order hierarchy of the frequency of these presentations as they were coded finally. And you can see here that TACO comes in third place. When you subtract, unrelated to transfusion as the most dominant category, it's actually very popular. But after FNHTR and allergic reactions, you got TACO. So, this is in first place as far as serious reactions go. And you can see that quite a few of our TACOs were only deemed possible. Do I want to dismiss those or not count those? Well, heck no, because this is a quality of care indicator too. And if correction means an inflation that brings me closer to the truth, I want it. The other point here with this little graphic is the 6 to 7 to 1 ratio between TACO and trolley. And so clearly, this is the bigger thing. And trolley is a rare event and we've got mitigations in place, but this continues to be a challenge for us to mitigate down. Wouldn't it be nice if this fell to the levels of trolley? So one resembles and begets another. So that's the tribulation number 3 is distinctions. Yeah, we know mechanistically how different these are, and even in terms of pretest probability based on the product that was involved. So yeah, erythrocytes stay intravascular, they're not extravasating, so that's going to be a more congestive, fluidic angioplasty event. But things that are very plasma rich are going to be more humoral, and so you can kind of, guess what your outcome is based on the foregoing product. But at the end of the day, both of these are two-hit biologies. They prey upon people who are sick already, and probably both co-potentiate each other, as well as both maybe all too commonly occurring together. As the trolley definition acknowledges, there is a trolley/TACO allowance. And I'll tell you, many, many times I end up on that category because, yeah, something that looks like trolley has happened, but just because they have a CHF risk, does that mean that they could possibly be vaccinated against the harm of something else? Absolutely not. And so, unfortunately, one form of bad luck does not protect our patients from another, and that's a cognitive bias or fallacy to think otherwise. So what about frequency? So the incidence and representation from all comers. So, I kind of like to talk about 90/10s. So, thankfully most transfusion encounters are non-reacting, but we'll say 1 to 10% of the time anything happens. And thankfully, most of the time, 90% of the time, these are minor, although based on TISS, maybe 30/70, and I think that reflects some bias because, people are likelier to report more significant events. But if you look at, real time or prospective data, this would be the more natural ratio. We've got vanishing infectious risks, thank goodness. So credit to how we responded to the global tainted blood tragedy with the Crever Commission of Inquiry. But what we now have in the 90/10s for non-infectious are reactions that are either quantitatively rooted or qualitatively rooted. And again, that's TACO. That's TACO versus everything else. So when we say that TACO occurs at a 1 to 10% risk, and 1 to 10% is the risk that we quote for reactions occurring in general, that's already alluding to the fact that this is the majority, probably the majority of what we're actually seeing if we were to be super prospective about this. So those quantitatively rooted volumetric overloads, unfortunately, also align with higher severity archetypes as we've seen. So the other way to frame this in frequency, and I always talk about this kind of 3 log scale tiers with 3 members in each of these. And this is sort of how I approach consent with patients, are the events that happen commonly that everyone, ought to know. The 3 things that happen less commonly, the 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 100,000 risk. And, when the discussion rounds out into some confidence boosting, when you say that this is like only a 1 in a million chance or like getting struck by lightning, what we have to realize is that my 3 Bs in the second category for the second letter of the alphabet, that breathing trouble really belongs in category 1. And so I've shifted that line so that we re-acknowledge that someone can get short of breath and that it's not a low probability event. So top among the kills, so tribulation number 4 is understanding causality in death. So again, not for me to demote or to denigrate the significance of TACO, even if it's not causal. Yes, there is a very high mortality association, and this is dominated among all transfusion-related deaths. And so every year I update the slide to look at what each of these hemovigilance bodies have published as their most updated data. And the confidence intervals here are getting very tight. So it's just over a third of transfusion-related deaths are due to TACO. And look at how close these numbers are, whether you're in Ontario, UK, or USA. So the question we've had is, to what extent does mortality by TACO reflect the direct effects of the injury as a driver of that death versus this just selecting the sick as a passenger? So when we thought, okay, let's look at our own data to see if we can get an insight. Are the associated in hospital mortality rates and the time to death among those who die different in TACO versus other reactions that weren't TACO? And so over this 8.5-year period, over 500,000 transfusions, we had 2,700 transfusion reactions with 273 TACO events. So 10% of our reactions were TACO versus 2,400 non-TACO reactions. And in terms of the death proportions by the reaction category, 17% of those who had TACO died versus 10% who had non-TACO reactions, and that was statistically significant. The possible TACOs had a lower death rate than the likely TACOs, which was interesting. But then when we looked at that time to death angle, the significance disappeared. So people who had non-TACO versus TACO kind of had the same time to death timeline. So the problems with observational studies are so many, right? There's selection bias, there's reverse causation. So we have to be very kind of mindful about and humble on that. But after we just had this dichotomous TACO versus everything else, we said, okay, let's drill down a little more specifically. Let's compare TACO not to the sum of everything else, but to the individual reaction types. And so if we take minor allergic transfusion reactions as what you would biologically expect to not cause death, and if a patient dies, to not have a short time from the reaction to the death, by which you might otherwise think there was a causal rule. Clearly, if you just look at this graph as quadrants, allergic reactions have a long time to death with a low visit involving mortality for the visit that had the reaction. So allergics are way off in this part of space. But if you look at these dyspneas, the trolley tabs and the TACO, they're definitely in a quadrant of their own. And no question, trolley has a short time to death with a high mortality. And it's possible that we didn't even give credit to trolley for its role in the death. And it's made me interested in looking at, okay, if I didn't say that this trolley caused death, but that patient died in their admission, maybe it did after all, because this is a very high number. TACO is quite a bit lower down, and it's interesting how close it is to some of these other things in the middle. And so this got us wondering whether, maybe again, this is just a predatory problem rather than the cause. And so we sort of looked at it in this way. So again, as anti-palliative care, trolley and Bacon's kind of felt close to where the trolley zone was. TACO is sort of in the middle. And again, I don't want this to imply that this is a less important reaction. But this is simply knowing now that TACO hurts the dying. And to me, that's concern enough. Now for the mysteries. So tribulation number 5 is why is pressure so darn pyrogenic? So the phenomenon of hot TACO has intrigued us. And maybe the nature of how we report things means that we dissociate diagnoses so we don't see their linkage anymore. But, in the background, you've got under recognition or hesitation to report TACO because it kind of reflects the quality of the care that you gave to the patient. Maybe the system has pressured us historically to just report singularities, you know, 2 patient reaction events as 2 separate rows in the database, for example, rather than the same row. So when we looked at 3 years worth of our TACOs, we found even when you subtracted those who had pre-transfusion fevers, a third of our TACOs spiked a temperature. And that's not normal because if febrile transfusion reactions only occur 0.3% of the time, this is a crazy inflation. So one of the theories was that, you know, if you pump, especially an older circulatory system with a lot of volume that it doesn't have capacity for, that someone with atherosclerotic plaques might be rupturing open and releasing pro-inflammatory mediators. So an interesting idea, but when we did, you know, in age of blood, in age of recipient analysis, we didn't see this pan out, although we may have been underpowered. But what we did do is compare TACOs to allergic reactions. And when we looked at people who started off their transfusion with a fever, they were 15 times likelier to have a TACO reaction than an allergic reaction on a base of a fever, which also means that maybe fever is a setup for TACO. And of course, the other way around, which was the original theme of the paper, which was the odds of developing a fever is 5 times higher on an afebrile base for TACO than an allergic. And that should strike us as strange because allergic reactions are immune complex events. So if anything's gonna have a fever, I would expect it to happen in allergic, and yet it's our TACOs that are doing this. So, you know, some people think, okay, we should just stop reporting TACO because it's a quality of care event. It's not the blood's fault. It's not CVS's fault. Just shut it all down. But there's something going on here, and this is not the time to look away. So anyway, febrile TACO, some people call it hot TACO, which is kind of cute. But again, the other way to look at this is the tenfold odds, because if you just take the cross product of FNHTRs and TACOs and the probability of those, they won't add up to these numbers. So TACO sex is another mystery. So tribulation number 6 is why the male vulnerability. So this is something that that is just in press now, but we reanalyzed our TACO with now an 11-year data set, 371 TACO events. And the predictors for TACO mortality were male sex, injury severity grade, product volume administered, and the use of platelets, as well as ICU admissions. Now, when we did a multivariate regression analysis, only male sex popped out. I have no explanation for why males would be more at risk of TACO. Is it coronary artery? So who knows, but that's kind of intriguing. So maybe a theme for November and male health. Tribulation number 7, why so little? And do we lose hope? So volugenesis, so to speak. So the other mystery is just how little it can take. And again, I've alluded to the physics of red cells as being the more tacogenic of products, because this is more intravascularly confined. It's not, you know, redistributing the way a plasma unit might. And the cytocrit of a bag of platelets is like a milliliter. So it's not like the packed cell volume of 65% of a red cell. So, you know, we're not the only ones who saw this. No matter what paper you look at, you know, the median invoked volume in a TACO is only about a cup. So, you know, what hope do we have? I mean, how much diuresis are we going to have to give? I mean, is that going to be enough if even this small amount can push someone over? It's interesting too, and this is yet another reason for why, you know, we're such strong proponents for choosing wisely. Why do 2 of 1 will do? Of course, 2 unit sittings. This is a shameful number, right? Like that this occurred in 22% of our TACO cases. So we should not have 2 unit sittings representing 22% of our transfusions, and certainly they don't. So that reflects obviously an inflation, and that a lot of volume is its own risk factor, even though you can have TACO with less. So tribulation number 8, how low can we go? So can we crush this down by using recognition and mitigation tactics? So we need to identify who's at risk, and yeah, we can use machine learning, but we already have some, you know, published criteria for that, and I use the poop emoji for TARDS and for crap. So this shows up in my presentations maybe more often than is tasteful. But, you know, you can anchor on these 4 variables in an EMR and at least, you know, flag those who need attention if the clinician is losing sight of the risk factors. And you can also have your EMR suggest modifications or even a pre-printed order sheet if the EMR doesn't have that level of engineering yet. So trends in mitigation by diuresis. The Taco Bell pilot RCT, so you know, Dr. Jacob Pendergrass is our master of the Taco Bell suite of studies, and he's going to be talking later about dose finding. But in this pilot RCT, which was demonstrating feasibility for the ultimate goal of 10 plus hospitals for 2,600 enrollments over 15 months, it did take us longer to get to a level that would model for the ideal time to get to the answer. But what was interesting, where this was positioned in time, when Toronto had its pre-Taco Bell audit, 74% of the furosemide doses when they were used were positioned after the transfusion. And after the Taco Bell pilot was done, that number shifted to pre-transfusion. So it goes to show that even the act of running a pilot will change culture. And so it also raises the question, like the longer we do this for and the more naturally penetrating this off-label course of action is that going to be a challenge for future enrollments? I hope not, but we want to get the answer because if this does help, then that's important. So now for the glad and the sad tidings. So the volume parade, there's some salutary revisions. So with pathogen reduction and our platelets also in platelet additive solution, we've got all kinds of serious and minor reactions being co-mitigated. What's interesting about the plasma is, you know, of course, these bags have shrunk, and we were very worried that in the implementation related education to get people ready for these smaller volumes and what their choices are to make sure that they still get a therapeutic dose into patients. We were worried that the education would correct the bad TACO mitigating practice of 2-unit orders, which aren't as heart stressful as full 4-unit orders. And so we were very worried that with the education on SDP that we would actually create a problem. So we had all kinds of options for people to remind them of what the therapeutic dose is for plasma, and it kind of fell on deaf ears anyway. So, you know, there was education on proper dosing. There were clinician decision tables built into the interface that you were confronted with if you were thinking about ordering this, and also the acknowledged option of theoretical equivalency based on some jurisdictions reporting this. So you don't really have to scale it up if you don't want to. And so really our plasma, so even though these units are 26% less in volume, we did not see back adjustments after launch. And what's very interesting is through this period, and I'll show you this in the next slide, we had a big reduction in plasma utilization. So again, I don't know if this is an EMR effect because people just lose their patience, but anyway, plasma activity went down, at least at UHN. Now for platelets, it's interesting. The majority of our platelets, of course, are the pools, and those have gone down significantly in their volume, but the apheresis platelets have not. And so, you know, will there be a difference in TACO rates? This would be an interesting thing to kind of study, because if volume to that degree makes such a difference, then maybe we would see a difference in reaction rates based on the production format. Perhaps the other phenomenon in reduced plasma use is just the cultural shift, even though these are just studies in the background and this hasn't been proven in its off-label use, is naturally shifting to PCCs and fibrinogen concentrate instead of plasma for those who have the choice of each. And really, you know, the only thing that's left unchanged is red cells, which still represent 66% of our dispensation. So realistically, how much of a TACO change do we expect if most of our wares, most of what we dispense is volume unchanged anyway? So, you know, the 2023 trends showed increases in red cell utilization, which always, you know, gets people upset when they look into UHN's data. And, you know, a lot of this is service related. So we did serve 7% more individuals, and you could see the amount of platelets that we used went up very significantly, went up in fact by 19% at both Toronto General and Princess Margaret. But the number of unique platelet recipients went up by that exact same amount. So we don't think that this is a problem with inefficacy of platelets and more per unique individual served. But as you can see, a big drop down in the amount of plasma. So maybe this is one of the things behind our lower TACO rates over time. And I'll show you something else that's proposed as the explanation. But I showed you data earlier that TACO represented 10% of our reactions. But then in 2023, TACO represented only 7%. So that is lower than what we're used to seeing. So that's part of the good news in the tidings. Now, TISS is, you can kind of see it as a three-dimensional construct. We gauge events by how severe they are, whether those who survive have an injury, and from facts perspective, for what's actionable to the maker or the transformer and self-accountability and donor deferral and lot number recalls and so forth, this dimension of safety requirements for processing and handling. And so what we heard with the sunsetting of the blood safety contribution program is really they just care about this foreground dimension because that's really what's relevant. And the heart of TISS is kind of there in the background in these other two dimensions, which we take very seriously. So, TISS provided the federal data on 2022, a month after the announcement of the blood safety contribution program sunsetting. So on September 24th, we got a sneak peek at the data, and TACO sticks out like a sore thumb. It's 37% of the allergic reactions, and you can see that it's a big portion of our deaths, so 33%. So how do we look away from that if that's not one of the things that are in that foreground dimension of interest to, that? So it was a bombshell. I don't want to mince words. I think, some of us wept at our computers and we were all kind of texting and calling each other. This was a traumatizing event for us. And, not having the support beyond, what the foundations were to hemovigilance, which admittedly were germ related, is shaking. Dr. C said it perfectly. Now a lot of the risk is at the bedside or the biology of the unique individual, which is still something that we need to know about so that we stop, immunocatastrophic events from happening, for example. So, a lot got paid out in injuries. And I just want to put this into perspective, and I hope that this isn't too incendiary, but, there was a news story on Canada kind of imitating the American concern. So, this is very sad that there's mass shootings in schools in the US, over 400 since 1999. And it's hard to imagine that almost 400,000 students have experienced exposure to a gun violence scenario in their school. Not as big a problem in Canada, but we spent $67 million since 2020. So that's $17 million per year on a gun buyback program, and not a single gun got turned in. And yet we have the Creever Commission of Inquiry. So since 2001, we've got the blood safety program with TISS and TESS in their various ascending incarnations, getting more and more captured at what we would say is a bargain, $2 million per year. Even if you multiply that by 23 years, that's 40 million, which still pales in comparison to the ineffectual gun buyback program. So furthermore, the 2.13 million that is quoted as what's sunsetting in a $1.5 billion budget, blood system is only 0.1% of the CDS budget, which is certainly in line with what I think Court Justice Creever thought would be appropriate as a way to stay on guard for emerging harms. So, there's ancient viruses and germs, some of which are highly transfusion transmissible and some of which aren't. But we had a parade of transfusion transmissible pathogens, and only by sheer stupefying luck were these other three arrivals not transfusion transmitted. But certainly, this kind of pressure, this kind of modeling is likely behind the adoption of pathogen reduction. And it does make me wonder if getting more relaxed about emerging harms is disappearing because there's this confidence that eventually the whole blood supply will be decontaminated and germs were the only concern. So yeah, 2023 was a landmark year for transfusion safety, but again, red cells, but for believing in conservative use, remain the only thing left non-pathogen reduced. So, when we got this messaging on the sunsetting, it kind of felt like something that a certain orange-fleshed individual would say. Like, just blow the whole thing up if it's not working efficiently. And yeah, we acknowledge that there's, there's some, prodigal labor and, not every, like, we don't like double data entry. Nobody likes it. Nurses don't like it. Technologists don't like it. That makes sense. But are the inefficiencies sufficient grounds for putting this all away? I don't think so. I wanted to think charitably about this, truly. Maybe this is the kick in the pants to regroup and do better. Blow the whole thing up so that you do something better than what we've been doing. Okay, fine. Pull out the middleware, because again, that's relying on extractions, which themselves might be erroneous, and it's also additional workload. So take out all of the middling, retranscribing, extracting practitioner work, and just connect the bottom to the top if you have these ambient EMR, tentacles that can do all of this machine learning, or at least do screening so that humans can sort, what a problem is and what isn't. So, we've got a lot of entities that we worry about. And, if you think about transfusion medicine and the cosmic calendar, we're sort of at this tail end. And there's also this philosophical anxiety. So I'll go back to Sagan here on this. He believed that the Drake equation on substitution of reasonable estimate suggested that a large number of extraterrestrial civilizations would form, but that the lack of evidence of such civilizations highlighted by the Fermi paradox suggests technological civilizations tend to self-destruct. And so is that what we're doing as a civilization? Is that what we're doing as a hemovigilance system? We're sort of analogous in the cosmic calendar to really being hemovigilance here in the last minute. And it struck me as analogous to something really kind of tragic at a human population caring level to turn this down rather than to turn it up. So some examples of non-CBS catastrophic outcomes. So, we're very red cell obsessed in blood bank. There's acute and delayed hemolytic reactions that aren't due to human error. And, just in the last couple of weeks, we had a very tragic case of Aspen, which isn't even, on our list of reportable events. Platelet transfusion refractoriness, post-transfusion purpura. Seb gave a great case recently on PTP, testing our knowledge on the fact that this wouldn't be reported outside of TISS. And so if TISS is no longer capturing this, who's going to know about PTP and whether or not this phenomenon is increasing? And if TGDHD is occurring not due to human error, but because some immune competent person by bad luck got a homozygous haploidentical donor, we're also not going to know about that if there's no system receiving that. Ways to sense leukoreduction failures. All kinds of things can be picked up by maybe the surrogate of more minor events and some of these more major events. And as of 2024, the world of blood bankers keeps getting more complicated. We're now at 46 blood group antigen systems with A and WJ. Our red cells are still not pathogen reduction amenable. It's still constituting 2/3 of what we dispense. It's still not mitigated by an integrated registry, so we still get all kinds of healthcare fragmentation related DHTRs. And I'll put this maybe bluntly, new worries on racist reagents. So some of the FC isoallotype detection powers of our Coons reagents are blind to some people with African ancestry. So it's possible that some of our patients with sickle cell who have hemolytic reactions are falsely showing up as seronegative because our reagents are not sensitive to the amino acid sequence of African ancestry. A lot of our reagents are based on European backgrounds, and that includes our screening cells. And so, we're also mulling over this idea that maybe we need a different kind of screening cell panel or screening cell set in people with BAL or people with sickle cell. So again, like, why are we silencing this when we're now sort of at a golden age and an age of high concern at the immunohematology level? further to that, we still can't explain why, transfusions do not decrease mortality. We don't recapitulate the benefits of having higher hemoglobins. If we're lucky, the mortality stays unchanged with conservative or liberal. And if you're unlucky, liberal transfusions increase your chance of death. And so we still have no idea if that's because, we shouldn't be interfering too much with evolutionary adaptations to anemia to a degree, or if there's something in transfusion that's, when given above a certain threshold, that's actually bad for you. So there's still a lot to figure out here. And the storage lesion does not look like the culprit, although some people still believe that it is, and that's fine. But, we have to acknowledge that there's not only deterministic direct harms, but probabilistic indirect harms. And whereas TISS in its current catalog might, be focused on the deterministic direct, if we do push hemovigilance into a more machine learning era, it can start to pick up these indirect or observational finding inspired connections between blood transfusion and adverse outcomes. So underperformance of transfusions and other additive disadvantages in length of stay, hospital mortality, and other morbidities. And so there are many of these possible or theoretical hazards. And if we have no system looking for them, how are we going to find them? And what's really so fascinating, Gustav Edgren, who has literally shut down every concern for what's transfusion transmissible, has this one study that actually says that maybe there is a problem with this one phenomenon. Okay, because he's ruled out, transfusion transmissible lymphoma and all these other concerns. But this Northern European study showing cerebral amyloid angiopathy potentially being a transfusion transmissible event. And when you ask these biostatisticians, they think this is real. So, we're shutting things down just as we're trying to figure out if this is actually a new concern. We haven't written this into our consent form, should we? This is kind of scary what the odds are, 2.3-fold for someone who gets exposed to a donor who eventually has these hemorrhages. And instead of a latency of 30 years for this phenomenon, it's within 5 years of exposure. So there's something intensifying about this mode of delivery of whatever the idiopathic agent is. Now we've got new platelets, and everyone comes with a twin sister. So we're shutting this whole system down just as we're on the verge of being able to assess reproducibility of transfusion reactions, which is wild. And we're just going to shut this whole thing down now. So astronomers sometimes talk about radio silence. So a lot of our communications in the old days were pulsed radio emissions. But as we developed satellites, all of our communications started turning into the Earth. And so Earth has actually kind of gone silent with respect to what we emanate out to extraterrestrials who might be capable of detecting us. So there's like this whole wave of, Hitler broadcasts from World War II that the aliens are seeing if they exist. But as we've become, a satellite culture of telecommunication, Earth has kind of gone silent. And so there's a bit of an analogy here too to shutting down a hemovigilance system and no longer hearing its noise. So I want to kind of be a little more positive now to talk about Tidings. So pre-printed orders, EMR clinician decision support in the single center experience in future state. So let's embed structural support. This review by Sunnybrook, so a CM alum, Yulia Lin and others, 121 downloads, very popular paper, just giving guidance on how to make your order sets look better to prevent TACO. We now have a whole bunch of hospitals in Ontario that are upgrading their EMRs. And, from end to end, if you can digitize all of this, it means that you can do a lot more. You can see more data-wise with big data people, and you can also build in more safety constructs. And so there's, a lot of funny chatter on Epic, which is the system that we and you guys here at McMaster adopted, Hamilton Health Sciences. But it is what it is, and this is what we're working with. And so this is what we decided to leverage. So we have some best practice advisory alerts, and one of them, because we used to be telephonic and paper-based ordering, is just to make sure that anyone who orders blood, if they don't have it, we can screen that it gets done, because otherwise our blood bank is going to be making 10 million phone calls in an era that was meant to ditch them. So this BPA functions very, very well. And if you've gone from paper to digital, you just make sure you have such a BPA so that your clinicians learn this. And eventually, you know, this thing hardly fires when you get enough institutional learning. But the other BPA that we developed was for TACO risk. And we've got the ORBCON dose calculator and all kinds of other things to help make IVIG orders safer and sensibly distributed over X number of days if it's a high dose protocol. So to speak to TACO risk, it's interesting that at least according to some AI that there isn't much in the way of papers that demonstrate EMRs with TACO mitigation having an effect yet. And so it should, though. It's kind of common sense that you would expect this because EMRs allow you to have accuracy in ordering, and also to the extent that TACO is based on error, it can give you warnings. So Leanne Roten is not the one presenting this portion of the talk because the pop-up that stopped the TACO, she had her own little Pop-Tart delivered on October 19th. And so she's taking care of her wee one, but she was behind the CSTM presentation where we were describing the impact of the EPA for TACO at UHN. And this is what it looks like. It triggers if it senses that the patient is more than 60 years of age or has a history of heart failure, and acute or chronic renal failure or diuretic use. So if those conditions, any one of those are met, you get a BPA when you order a blood product, and it reminds you what you can do to make your order better, or maybe just back off. So we had looked at the pre-implementation era, which was long. We had 12 and a half years versus the first year post-implementation. And the transfusion reaction reporting rate was pretty similar. Statistically, it was similar, although post-implementation, maybe 5% off. We had 406 versus 17 cases. And when you scale that to the denominator, whether you scale it to the amount of products issued or the interval or the frequency over time at which TACO was occurring, it fell by 50% after the BPA, which actually blew our socks off. We had no expectation that it would perform this well. So very statistically significant. And as I said, we're used to seeing TACO rates of 10%. In this first year after implementation, it's around 5%. And as I said, in 2023, we've edged up to 7%. So I don't know if we're going to lose the benefit of this BPA. So it'll be interesting to see what a couple more years look like. But anyway, this is preliminary data that was just at CSTM. And so Leanne gave us this lovely run chart and also looked at what some of the associated volumes were. And it looked just like our recipe for a TACO analysis for who's got multi-unit sittings. The majority of these, again, are single red cell unit sittings, which goes to show that those might have been people complying with the decision alert anyway. And so again, there are limits, unfortunately, these frustrating limits to prevention efforts. Now, just because they don't want our TACO numbers, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't want our TACO numbers. And so if we all at each hospital are still interested, how shall we sum ourselves up at the end of the day with respect to benchmarking and share our lessons learned and triumphs? And so I was very heartened to hear that Andrew said that this is not going to shut down. We're still going to continue. And that just made me almost cry, tears of joy. So, I think there are challenges with figuring out how to mine hospital data. And I think there's always this issue of privacy. And I try to kind of push this point on relativistic privacy. So there are some domains that don't need to be looked at, but others where you've got low stigma but high safety output. And that would be allo antibodies, and that would be, things related to TACO. So, if we blow this whole thing up and we take out all the middle, we kind of force ourselves to evolve in a different way. And so when the tech or a political or government system fails, let's say there's a nuclear war, whatever, we join our hunter and gatherers. We go back to first principles. We start fresh. And so do we develop something Scandat-like in Canada? CANDAT, i.e. Gemini. So Gemini is an amazing pilot. Do we scale that up? And it's not easy because, as everyone has pointed out, coding or understanding what happened in a reaction has so many layers and so many contexts. So, if we were to build algorithms, how would we make it mimic what our current process actually looks like? So the root source big data options have been spoken to, and I couldn't be more proud of Nadia and Raza, who presented at the same session with Rushika Gol over at ABB just a few days ago. Again, talking about some of their research in Gemini, and I do think that this is the way to go. And so I loved this this picture and quote. So these sea robins kind of do a little bit of everything, and maybe that's what Gemini needs to do, and that's what our collective intelligence needs to do. We need to adapt is the key thing here. And as Andrew mentioned, we're thinking of retooling TISS and TESS, and so looking at reportables first, because that at least is still overtly supported. But let's keep with the non-reportables and consider entities to subtract and add. Like, do we need hemochromatosis? Maybe yes, if it's big data and it's easy to gather back. Do we add things like Aspen? Integrating human or system errors. So do we do everything that TESS was meant to do, not in a separate system, but embedded within hemovigilance as per the SHOT UK model? And Hemo-Quebec and SHOT UK just have amazing examples of how to structure these things. So we're really looking for something best in breed. And so, chopstick, we want to bring these rockets back. We want to know what's going on, and that takes some grace and technology and intelligence. So I'm going to wrap up here as we looked at Tribulations, Tidings, and Tiding ups. And I hope that wasn't too hopeless or upsetting, but thank you so much for your attention. And don't be shy, and welcome comments and critiques. Happy Halloween, and thank you again.
Thank you so much, Christine. That was excellent, and such a great overview of the literature, and such a great, philosophical, discussion around, the hemovigilance in Canada, and also how do we prepare for a better future. Maybe I'll ask first of all if there are any questions or comments that people had for Christine in the audience here. If not, we'll go over to the Nancy.
A question, Christine. First of all, the amount of work you've done in this area is amazing, and I congratulate you on that. My question for you, do you feel that all of the information from UHN is generalizable to the rest of us?
Yes and no. So because we have 3 sites, Toronto Western is literally a replica of our rural hospitals. So when you look at the ratios and I can almost get the signature of a hospital based on its red cell to platelet ratio or its plasma use. And so when we've looked at all of our sites, Toronto Western is a microcosm of our northern network. Toronto General, definitely not. Transplantation, apheresis. When we look at Princess Margaret, extreme cancer care, BMT. So I believe that we can leverage each of these sites to learn about generalizabilities in different ways. But I do think that we're very lucky. And with Paula Carroll now, our northern network gets the same high quality, deep chart dive. We put so much heart and soul into understanding the harm that hits patients in our north. And I'm hoping, those reports look just like someone at UHN. If machine learning wants to have a heyday with those, I welcome entry into our binder. Yeah, I think that, treat everyone equally and see what comes out, and look at these profiles, because we might discover that we have some ways to simulate generalizability or pick what we use as the representative.
I was just thinking as you were answering there too, it might be interesting to look at the TTISS data that we have and group together the UHN and the other microcosms that are very similar, and just look at reports of TACO reactions. It might give some interesting insight.
Yeah, the high red cell profile hospital is going to have a lot more TACO, I think, than others, unless a hospital has not a lot of attention. If there's a quality of care hotspot where there's you know, a lot of people with CHF and reckless volumes, then yeah, you're gonna see a different picture. But hospitals, they have amazing fingerprints. You know, when you look at the denominator of use and the reactions that are coming out of them, like I've learned so much about just how deeply anemic and iron deficient people are when they show up at a Northern Network hospital. And it's made me, and I've said this to Nadia too, that even our using blood wisely construct on saying that, you know, you have to have single unit sittings as a marker of quality of care, that would be malpractice at an institution where someone comes in with a hemoglobin of 30. And so I worry about, you know, like poverty-stricken, deeply iron deficient communities being held to a standard of single unit sittings, because even that metric of quality of care comes from a position of privilege.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the crowd?